The New York Rangers won the President's Trophy last year, but they did suffer some losses this offseason, although they also added. Will they be in contention for the President's Trophy again, and more importantly, for the Stanley Cup? John Chik of Locked On Rangers joins us to discuss this next on the Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Gil Martin here, and welcome everybody to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen today. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. It is my pleasure to welcome to the show the host of Locked On New York Rangers, John Chik. And John, it's been an interesting off-season so far for the Rangers. A lot of departures, and most of them expected. But out of all the players who left, which one concerns you the most?
There's nobody I think that's like overly concerning, because I think in most cases, most of the players that are now ex-Rangers, and no disrespect to anybody, I think everybody on that roster had a hand in them making it as far as they did this past playoffs, getting into the Eastern Conference Final before falling to the Panthers. But I feel like at just about every single position, whether we're talking about, Roslovic, he's going to be replaced probably by Riley Smith. I mean, that kind of seems like it's the way that they're going there, and Riley Smith will be in a top six role. If Philip Hedl is healthy, then he'll take over for Alex Wenberg. You got Zach Jones stepping into the lineup seemingly as a regular in place of Erik Gustafsson. And Barclay Goodrow, that's probably the one downgrade, as the fourth line center, going from him to Sam Carrick. But I think with Barclay Goodrow, the cap hit just was a little bit too high for somebody that largely plays on your fourth line. I do think of all the departures, maybe you'll miss him the most just because of the intangibles and the fact that it does feel like this guy always steps up come playoff time. He'll have like 2 or 3 goals in the regular season and then end up with 5 or 6 goals in the playoffs. That's kind of how he does it. And does a lot of the little things that maybe fly under the radar, a physical player and somebody that kills penalties as well. So if they're going to miss anybody, and he was an alternate captain on top of all that. So if they're going to miss anybody, I'd say probably Barclay Goodrow. But there's nobody that left that causes like a massive hole in the lineup or anything like that. So I think they'll be all right with some of the players that they've brought in to replace some of those guys that I just mentioned.
Yeah, it seems that way. Do you think they're still President's Trophy and Stanley Cup contenders at this point?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I was talking about this on my show where I was comparing this past season's opening night roster to what it looks like it's going to be for this season's opening night roster. And it goes back to what I was just talking about. I think in just about every position, the Rangers, either the player from last year is still here this year. The core is obviously still intact. So either that's the case or you're in a situation where they've probably upgraded, top line right wing. Again, I think that's the best example. Going from Jack Roslovic to Riley Smith, that to me feels like at least something of an upgrade. I don't think they're like massively better than last year's team, and nothing's guaranteed. They can be better on paper. It might not lead to them having the best record in the NHL again. The Metro Division is always tough. We know that. There's no guarantees that they'll repeat there either. But I think on paper, this team has gotten slightly better. I would have liked to have seen them add maybe a little bit more snarl and a little bit more grit to this team. Riley Smith is a fine player, but I would have preferred somebody that, maybe brings a little bit of that mix of skill and toughness to the top line. And, Smith has some skill. He's very good off the rush and all that stuff. And, solid player, but I feel like there were a couple of guys out there that maybe I would have liked a little bit more that end up signing one-year deals. Guys like Anthony Mantha, Jason Zucker, I think they might have been better fits. But regardless, I'm excited, man. I think this championship window is still wide open. And something that gives me hope, and I've talked about this in my show, is, and again, none of this guarantees anything, but you look at recent NHL history. A lot of teams over the last few years have kind of been knocking on the door, and then they finally kicked it down, whether it's the Knights, Tampa Bay Lightning ×2. They won 2 Stanley Cups. The Avalanche for a while were always, had one of the best records in the league. Couldn't really get past the second round. They recently won a Stanley Cup. If you want to go back a little bit farther, you look at the Capitals. They for years were the team that couldn't do it in the playoffs until they did. So, yeah, man. Look, they lost the Panthers. Panthers won fair and square. I don't think that series was as one-sided as a lot of people would have you believe. And I think the Rangers are right there and still among the elite teams in this league.
Do you think if there is one area you think that this team could tweak, whether it's before the season starts or even up until the trade deadline, as of right now, what does that look like?
As far as like an adjustment that they would make, I mean, I feel like this is their team. We'll see what happens when the trade deadline rolls around, but you might be in a situation where you get to this year's trade deadline where you're looking to bring in one more big time forward, somebody that can score. Maybe you go in a different direction. Maybe you bring in somebody that can add a little bit more grit to this team. Overall, though, I feel like they've put together a good roster here, and I don't think any like massive changes are going to happen, certainly between now and the start of the regular season. When the trade deadline rolls around, we'll see who's on the roster and how much cap space accrues. But I would look for them to be active at the trade deadline and add some complementary pieces around that time. However they're doing, certainly I think they'll be in contention and they'll be a team looking to buy. And I think, you'll see them pounce at the trade deadline as they have in recent seasons.
Any up and coming prospects that you have your eye on in training camp?
Yeah, Brandon Hoffman for sure. I talked about this, I think, on the most recent episode that I did. 3 Ranger prospects that have the best chance of making an impact on the Rangers for this upcoming season. Brandon Hoffman, for anybody that might not be familiar with that name, first-round pick for the Rangers, I believe number 16 overall a couple of years ago, 2021. And he's a left winger, but he can play a little bit of right wing as well. He was up for 3 games last year, and then they sent him back down to the AHL. But I think that was always the plan. They just wanted to get him a little bit of a taste of NHL action. He got it last year, and I think this year he'll be given every opportunity to make this team out of training camp. And even if that does not happen, you got to believe that when the Rangers need a spark or they're just looking to call somebody up, if he performs well in the AHL this year as he did last year, he'll be one of the first guys that they call. And somebody who, I talked about this a minute ago, but he has that intriguing blend of skill and toughness. This guy is a wrecking ball out there, despite not being necessarily the biggest player on the ice. And he's got some skill as well. He set the OHL on fire when he was there, put up a bunch of points in his first season with the Wolfpack last year too. So I think he's the guy. And I'll give an honorable mention also to Brett Berard, former 5th-round pick. Doesn't have the hype and the hoopla surrounding him the way that Hoffman does, but this is a guy that's just progressed really nicely, good all-around game. And again, a little bit of a mix of, the skill and the toughness that I think Ranger fans everywhere like. So he's my honorable mention, is Brett Berard.
Got to mention this, just announced earlier this week that Sam Rosen, who has been doing Rangers television play-by-play for 40 years, is going to be stepping down at the end of this season. Wanted your thoughts about Sam Rosen, his legacy with the Rangers, and what his retirement means to Ranger fans.
Yeah, the guy's a franchise icon. I mean, there aren't too many announcers really in hockey or any other sport where you look throughout the history of broadcasting, no matter how much success, an announcer might have, there's always some naysayers. There's always that group of fans that's like, oh, I don't really like that guy, or I don't really like that person, right? It's not really the case with Sam Rosen. I mean, every once in a while, you'll find a contrarian who is just doing that. They're just going against the grain for the sake of going against the grain. But as far as like universally beloved sports broadcasters, I mean, I feel like he's up there. Ranger fans love him. He obviously has a lot of passion for his job. He's been doing it, as you mentioned, for 40 years. And we're really going to miss him. He's got some iconic calls. Nobody will ever forget the 94 Stanley Cup where, the waiting is over. The New York Rangers are the Stanley Cup champions, and this one will last a lifetime. I mean, every Ranger fan on the planet can say that verbatim. Another good one was a couple of years ago, single overtime against the Pittsburgh Penguins in Game 7. But, I mean, he was just thrilled about that win as well. And, we're certainly going to miss him. But we were talking about this a second ago off air, Gil. I'm glad that at least we know that, like, okay, this is going to be his last year. I wouldn't have wanted to see the announcement that, like, oh, he's done. He's just not going to come back. Like, at least we know now that we can get used to it. And, just enjoy this last season with Sam Rosen as the play-by-play guy for the New York Rangers. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, he certainly deserves that victory lap, that send-off. Every time I've met him, he has been a class act and a great guy. And he is an institution here in the New York area. John, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, anywhere you're listening to this or watching this, you can find Locked On New York Rangers there as well. We're on every audio streaming platform you can think of, also on YouTube. And you can find me on social media, on Twitter, at JChik17. Give me a follow, talk some hockey, have some fun, get excited for the season. Definitely looking forward to watching some Ranger hockey.
All right. Well, just a month away from training camp. John, thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for having me, Gil.
Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. We're driven by the search for better, but when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work with Indeed. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with quality candidates faster. Join more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of this show will gain a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.